No, Camille, what kind of children are we having now? Stephen reasoned. We can't afford them. When we get on our feet, when we get up, then we'll think about children. But not now, but later. What are you so worried about? They'll give you a pill. You won't even feel a thing. In a few years, you'll have a healthy baby, and everything will be fine. We'll have the normal family we've always dreamed of. So the news that Camille was pregnant shocked Stephen. It had never been part of his plans. It seemed to him that he and his wife understood each other. They were young and, as it seemed to the young man, very promising. Camille and Stephen met in the walls of the Institute, the creative environment in which they studied, disposed to stormy and passionate romances. Young students, budding directors, who already imagined their luxurious and successful future. Stephen beckoned into himself almost a second Fellini. He believed that his ideas deserve increased attention from both representatives of the creative community and sponsors. The young man dreamed not only of world fame, but also of big money. And Steve and Emily supported him in everything. He was her only son. And in whom else to believe in a lonely woman, if not in him? A light-in-the-window gifted boy. Throughout his short life, Emily did nothing but sing dithyrambs to her son. Where to take a healthy and adequate self-esteem when the mother is constantly itching for spirits, saying, what a talented son, a brilliant writer and director. Camille was crazy about Stephen. He seemed to her unusual, not like everyone else. She fell in love with the young man at first sight. Like any other young girl, Camille wanted romance. She was also a deeply creative person and could not live without love. Stephen inspired her with his large-scale thinking. They fantasized about the future together. Except that his mother was very unhappy that her son had decided to marry so early, would get bogged down in the diaper of their crib and cry. Your directing career? She wailed when Stephen introduced her to his girlfriend. Before you know it, you'll find yourself in some penny job where you'll be working like hell just to feed your family. How many talented people have been ruined by domesticity? You can't imagine what awaits you. But Stephen was sure that nothing like that would happen to him and Camille. You don't understand, Mom, he reasoned. We're of the same blood. We'll do everything together. We have the same outlook on life. We'll be fine. After the wedding, Camille moved in with her husband and mother-in-law. Stephen insisted on it, because he couldn't live a day without his beloved mommy. Well, you understand that we have studies, and you need to get into the people, Stephen reasoned. And my mom will take on all the responsibilities of life. That's great. Your mom won't do all that. She's against our relationship. You're against it too? Parried Camille, trying to convince her husband-to-be that she would not want to part with her mother, but we have to live with her for some reason. Stephen's relationship with Evelyn didn't work out right away. As soon as he crossed the threshold of her apartment, he was immediately confronted with a critical. Evaluating, with the gaze of a mother, the daughter's chosen one did not come to her liking. She absolutely rightly considered him irresponsible and completely unreliable man. What kind of Fellini is he? Smirked the woman. He cannot even write scripts for TV series. Ordinary, talentless kid with monstrous ambition, which nurtured in him his own mother. Can't you see that? How can you be so blind? Camille. Evelyn was not a stupid woman. She looked at the root of it. All she had to do was see Stephen to know what he was like. She'd seen his kind many times in her life. She'd been confronted, so the woman had no doubt at all that she was not mistaken. But Camille did not want to hear anything. Even when the young man had a bad job and it was obvious that he could not achieve anything in life, the girl continued to defend him. This led to conflicts with her mother, which Camilla preferred to turn a blind eye and ignore. She loved Stefan too much and sincerely believed in his success, calmed the young man. After every failure, they just don't understand anything, Camilla reasoned. All these sponsors, producers, they only have money on their minds. They don't see the real talent. But don't despair. Sooner or later, you will definitely have the opportunity to reveal your talent and declare yourself to the whole world. Trust me. But time passed, and in the life of the couple, nothing changed. All this was maddening Stephen, who was sure that he was waiting for a dizzying directorial career. Creativity of a young man was very mediocre. He did not understand it and did not want to accept it. Even the opinion of the teacher was not authoritative for him. They don't understand anything, he convinced himself. What I'm doing is modern, progressive. They're obsessed with something old, but that's absurd. But whatever Stephen thought to himself, the reality he faced was more than obvious. The young man had no job and no money. Stephen's prospects were becoming more and more dim with each passing year. And despite the fact that he continued to make attempts to break into the big movie and television to achieve in the near future success in this field, he would clearly not succeed. That to get a regular temporary job in order to feed himself and his wife was out of the question. Stephen didn't even want to hear about it. "Are you crazy?" he exclaimed when Camille told him that she had found a part-time job and that the young man should do the same. "I'm not going to waste my precious time on some penny ante job with absolutely no prospects. It's ruining my talent. I won't be able to write anything at all. No, Camille, no job is out of the question. I have to do my own thing. I have so many new ideas, I haven't even written them all down yet." The argument that they can't sit on Emily's neck forever. Stephen wasn't taken into account, and he was being so brash and cavalier. It was not for nothing. The young man knew that his mother was ready to provide for him even to old age, only if he wrote his brilliant poem. But to support her daughter-in-law, the woman did not want to. All groceries at my expense, the utilities at my expense. "And you, by the way, you live here too." Emily was indignant. "In general, so you will pay half of the costs. I can't afford to support everyone." That Stephen should also pay for something was out of the question. The woman willingly took care of all the expenses of her favorite son. But Camille had to get a part-time job to contribute to the family budget. However, she was not proud. Unlike her husband, the girl never considered it shameful to work, and she could use the money. When Evelyn learned that her daughter not only works as a waitress, but also gives money to her husband and mother-in-law, she was out of anger. "Are you crazy?" She was outraged when her daughter told her everything. "Go back home and live in peace. Why on earth should you have to support this grown-up bastard? Let him go and work. What is he, the redhead?" Camille tried her best to calm her mother down, but it was no use. Evelyn was so angry that she was ready to deal with the lazy and insolent young man herself. The girl with difficulty managed to dissuade her mother from this conversation. "I beg you very much. Please stay out of my life," Camille begged. "Stephen is my husband, and we'll deal with him ourselves." "Then don't complain," the woman exclaimed. "I see how you live. You're not happy with it. But if you're not ready to change anything, then don't whine. By God, I'm sick of it. I'd put your Stephen in his place in a heartbeat, but you feel sorry for him. He's so talented, so gifted. But he doesn't do a damn thing. He's hoping for something, you goddamn talentless bastard. He'll spend his whole life sitting on your mother's neck. Why do you need such a husband?" Camille saw the true face of her chosen one only when she learned that she was expecting a child. The news came as a complete surprise to her. She and Stephen hadn't planned to have children, but since it happened, the girl expected her husband to be happy. So she took his first reaction as the absolute norm. But what else could he say? She pondered to herself, "We didn't think it would turn out like this. Stephen's just in shock. He'll move on, and we'll talk to him calmly about it." But a baby was not part of Stephen's plans under any circumstances. He was not going to sacrifice his creative plans for the sake of diapers and cradles. The young man was simply not ready for such responsibility. Camille hoped to find support at least from her mother-in-law. She hoped that Emily would convince her son that a child is the real happiness and should not get rid of it under any circumstances. But the woman sided with her son. "If you give birth, you won't be able to work," she said. "And what will you live on with the baby? Have you thought about that? Your pregnancy could jeopardize my boy's career. Once the baby's born, you'll get bogged down in all that domesticity. And then what kind of directing? What creativity? One job without sleep or rest. We can't take that risk." Evelyn didn't want her daughter to have a baby. It made hanging around disgusting to her. The very thought of it. Can you imagine if the child inherits all his best qualities from his father, will be the same lazy bum, the woman reasoned. And what will you do with him? You'll have to carry him around all your life, just like your husband. People like your Stephen should not breed. Don't you realize that? Genes are stubborn things, and God forbid a son or daughter like that. The lack of support from her mother was the biggest blow to Camille. She had hoped that at least Evelyn would support her, but she was also against the girl having a baby. Camille had the impression that the whole world was against her and the baby she wanted to keep. The girl was desperate. She did not know where to run or who to ask for help. Camille loved Stephen in spite of everything. Whatever he was, she still loved him very much. And she couldn't just walk away from him. And a mother with a child was unlikely to take her back. And even if it did come back to her, any help from Evelyn was out of the question. She did not love the baby, even though it was still in her womb. In her opinion, the future baby was by definition a mistake of nature and a punishment of fate. Stephen had the same conversation with Camille every night. "When are you going to see a doctor?" the husband inquired. "Or are you deliberately delaying it?"
"It'll be too late. The sooner you solve the problem, the better for all of us. We've already agreed on everything, discussed everything. I don't understand why you haven't seen a doctor yet." "But don't you feel sorry for our baby?" Camille asked.
"Are you so cruel and heartless?" "I'm not cruel," resented Stephen. "And not heartless. What are we going to feed our child on? How are we going to live? Have you thought about that?" Camille thought about it every minute and came to the disappointing conclusion that her husband was right. She had no money to support her child. She had nowhere to live. If she gave birth, she would have to separate from Stephen. Neither he nor her mother-in-law would tolerate the baby's cries in their apartment. Her husband was not prepared to stay up nights with baby crying. Camille had realized this clearly for several days. The girl was immersed in anxious thoughts. She constantly had strange dreams, as if she was drowning and trying to swim out. But she did not succeed. The water covers her head, and she suffocates. Camille woke up in a cold sweat. She realized that she could not go on like this, and finally decided to take a desperate step. This ordeal was not the only one for Camille. A few days after a serious conversation with her husband, a phone call interrupted her heavy thoughts. That day, she had a day off, and she planned to visit her mother to discuss the situation with her once again. Deep down, Camille hoped that Evelyn would understand her and accept the future baby. Then she would be able to cancel the appointment for the damned operation, which could put a cross on her whole future life. It's her grandson, she thought to herself, or her granddaughter. Who cares who the father is? What matters is that we can raise him to be a decent person. Unlike her mother, Camille was sure that everything depended on upbringing and on what the adults responsible for the child's fate would put into the child's head and soul. It can't be otherwise. The girl quickly picked up the phone to quickly get rid of the phone conversation she was having at that moment. But what she heard shocked her. You are being disturbed from the hospital. There was a sad female voice on the other end of the line. We have to inform you, Camille couldn't listen to her mumbling. Everything she had heard did not fit in her head. How dead, she exclaimed. How could it not be saved? Tell me that it's not true. That you're wrong. I beg you. Tell me it's all nonsense. Towards the end of the conversation, Camille began to scream. She couldn't believe that this nightmare was happening to her. Yesterday, at Furahot, her mom was alive. She had talked to her on the phone, shared her feelings, thoughts, and worries. And today she's gone. She died on the spot, gave poetry to Camille and her head. There was nothing we could do.
On that fateful day, Evelyn went shopping as usual. There was no sign of trouble. The woman always had a responsible demeanor. She never stepped out of her way, crossed the road carefully, and did nothing but look around. Where did this insane, drunken scumbag come from?
She did not even have time to jump aside when he flew into the crosswalk. The impact was so strong that the woman immediately lost consciousness. And he did not even stop, as he drove at breakneck speed, not noticing anything and no one around him, and went on. The ambulance and police arrived a few minutes later, but by then Evelyn could not be saved. The woman's death was instantaneous. Dumbfounded passers-by watched the scene with their eyes wide open. What a bunch of freaks! The voices of eyewitnesses of the accident were heard from the crowd. And do not talk, sullenly nodded passers-by. They drive as they want, and they don't care about all conceivable and unthinkable laws. There are no words. And the woman is still young. She should live to see. Stephen reacted coolly to the news of his mother-in-law's death. He didn't care for it. Unfinished, Fellini was completely immersed in the creation of another masterpiece, the fate of which, however, unlike all his other creations, dust on the shelf. Hey, if you need help with anything, you tell me, he said, without taking his eyes off the computer. I'll help. I'll just finish the script. God, how could he help her? He didn't even have a dime to his name. The young man paid no attention to his wife's tears or her suffering. He was too busy creating. How could she distract him with such nonsense as organizing a funeral? Even Emily was much more sympathetic to her sister-in-law, which surprised her greatly. Camille had not expected such support from her mother-in-law, who hated not only her, but also her late mother. However, Evelyn could not have deserved any other treatment from her. She had spoken the truth openly about her precious little boy. And Emily loved that. If you need help with the finances, just tell me. I'll give you the money, the woman promised. In Camille's soul, there was a hope that after all that had happened, her mother-in-law would penetrate to her situation and forget that she had offered her to get rid of the child. But in vain, she thought so, continuing to go off and recount. Emily offered the girl not only financial help, but also support in organizing the funeral. You have to go to the doctor, she reasoned. Still, even though it's such a left, but the operation. There's no chance of anything going wrong. And here, and with the funeral to deal with, here to negotiate, there to negotiate, to take the body, the coffin, to order. You want me to take care of all that? You need to solve the main problem now, without forgetting about it. Emily's cynicism shocked the poor girl, but now she had no way out. If in the long run she could count on the compassion and support of her mother, then now it had to forget about it forever. Camille was left all alone, and there was nowhere else to go for help. She decided she would have the operation before the funeral. The morgue said the body could be picked up in a few days. The thug who took Evelyn's life was caught in the act. He will be charged. And with the body, experts had to carry out certain manipulations, which Camille was not going to prevent. She felt that this should be enough time to terminate the pregnancy. The doctor assured her that complications were rare, the term was short, and if she decided, there was nothing to delay. After everything that had happened, it was even harder for Camille to accept that she would have to get rid of her baby. It all came at once. It was a fate she hadn't expected, but she had no choice. Her mother was dead, and the only people Camille has left are her mother-in-law and her husband. They're against her having a baby. Of course, she can oppose them to leave home to her mother's apartment, to divorce, but then she will be all alone. And how would she live with a baby? Help. There's no one to torn between work and a newborn. It's unrealistic for them to work. Of course, all of Evelyn's savings will go to Camille, since she's the sole heir. But they were so meager that they would hardly be enough for even 6 months of living. Selling the apartment wouldn't help either. Evelyn lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, the meterage of which did not exceed the area of a modern studio apartment. In return, she would need to buy some housing, after which there would hardly be enough money left to sit comfortably in maternity leave. And the child in the future will need his own room, especially if a boy is born, huh? They wouldn't really live on each other's heads. But most importantly, Camille was not ready to stay. The mere thought of it depressed her, so she tried her best to convince herself that her husband and mother-in-law were right. When 6 months had passed since Evelyn's death and Camille had inherited the apartment, she would be able to rent it out. This will provide additional income for the family. And in time, Stephen will rise? In Camille's mind, it couldn't be otherwise. Even if he doesn't become a brilliant director of international renown, he'll be able to put his creations somewhere, and then the money will come in. Even those who direct all sorts of nonsense and write scripts for banal soaps not badly earned, she pondered to herself as she continued to turn a blind eye to her husband's true identity and what he was. The night before the operation, Camille could not sleep. All she could think about were the words of the doctor Camille had seen a few days before the tragic death of her mother.
I will, of course, make an appointment for you, the doctor said thoughtfully. You have every right to make your own decision about the pregnancy. But if I were you, I'd give it some thought.
It is quite possible that you will not be able to have any more children in the future. If you take such a desperate step now, the consequences could be very serious. As soon as Camille closed her eyes, the image of a small blonde boy with clear blue eyes came to her. He looked reproachfully at the woman and asked her the same question. Who is dearer to you than me or them? Are they more important to you? Mommy, my darling, I love you so much. Don't kill me. I came to this earth for a reason. I have a special mission. Camilla immediately opened her eyes to get rid of the visions. She felt as if they were following her. The woman struggled like that until the morning, never sleeping a wink when she had to go to the doctor's office. She was a total wreck, and even seriously considered postponing the surgery. But after taking a shower and coming to her senses, Camille realized that if she didn't get to the doctor's office today, she wouldn't be able to take such a desperate step. She quickly packed up and ran out of the house and headed for the hospital. The woman decided not to take a cab, but to walk to get some fresh air and finally come to her senses. The way to the hospital was not a short walk. Camille walked through the park. She thought it would be better that way. Nature always had a calming effect on Camille. She could walk for hours among the trees and think about things, listening to the birds singing. At that moment, she just needed to calm down and realize the reality in which she found herself. In a few days, she would say goodbye forever to her mother, who, though not always right, was the closest person to her. Today, Camille would be rid of the child she might have had. She reassured herself that it would be better for herself, for her family, and even for this unfortunate baby who had not even been born yet and was already bothering everyone. Camille tried to find arguments to get rid of the guilt that would haunt her for a long time anyway. After the operation. But the woman didn't believe herself. She talked herself into it and persuaded herself. But deep down, she realized that it was all empty. She was lying to herself first and foremost, and the realization of this made Camille terrified. But there was nothing she could do about it. The fear of total loneliness was so strong that Camille could not overcome it on her own. It was beyond her strength. Suddenly, Camille felt dizzy. Everything that happened next was a blur. She did not remember how she had found herself on a bench in the very park
through which the road to the hospital lay. A young man was sitting next to her, holding her hand tightly. "Where?" Camille asked in confusion. "What's wrong with me? Have you fainted?" The stranger replied. "I picked you up and carried you to a bench." "You can't lie on the cold ground." "He's a humorist," Camille remarked to herself. But after a moment, she was no longer in the mood for jokes. She suddenly remembered what had happened to her. It made her feel sick again. The image of a woman who looked painfully like her late mother came to her mind. When Camille had come face to face with her, she had fainted from surprise and confusion.
"Wait," called out. "A woman dressed in a colorful long skirt. I have something important to tell you." Looking closely at the woman's face, Camille realized that she only remotely resembled Evelyn. She stared intently into Camille's eyes and did not let go of her hand. But she did not dare to continue the conversation until the girl let her know that she was ready to listen to her. A gypsy, Camille thought. The woman standing beside her was covered with gold. On her head, she wore the same colorful shawl as her skirt. No, she looks like her mother, Camille thought. For several minutes, they looked at each other in silence. But finally, Camille agreed to listen to the stranger. "You're making a big mistake," the woman said. "If you do what you set out to do, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. And I can tell you your whole fate in plain English." Camille realized that she was talking about the termination of the pregnancy, and at that moment she thought she was hallucinating. "How do you know all this?" she asked. "You just can't know." For a second, Camille thought she saw the image of her mother. But of course, her soul had not yet left this world. It dawned on the young woman. "Mom, did you come to me to convince me not to get rid of the child?" Camille asked in confusion. "But how could I?" "Did you realize after your death that you can't take another person's life? You didn't want me to have Stephen's child, did you? You always thought he was a scoundrel." The stranger jerked Camille back to reality, and she realized that a completely different woman was standing in front of her. "I'm not your mother, but I won't tell you my name. You don't need to know it. You'd rather hear about what lies ahead. Don't you want to know?" Camille didn't want to discuss her decision with a stranger. It was hard enough as it was. It was very hard for her. But the woman wasn't going anywhere. Looking intently at Camille, she asked if they could continue the conversation. And when the woman, who was in a completely lethargic and uncomplaining state, nodded. The woman narrated what lay ahead of her. "That child you carry under your heart is extraordinary," the woman said. "A talent like he has, it's from above, and you have no right to take his life. It's a great sin that will put a curse on your whole family and your whole clan." "But I have no one else," Camille objected. "We go to the ground from day to day, and I am alone. Who am I to fear for? You don't know your fate, so don't be so sure. You'll meet your love again, and such a love that you'll forget your foolish husband once, and for all, throw him out of your heed and never remember him again. I'm telling you this in good faith. But when you meet your soulmate, you'll have a child with him, a beautiful daughter. And now you can influence her fate directly. If you kill your son now, your little girl will never be happy. She'll be subjected to the kind of ordeal you wouldn't wish on an enemy. If you don't think of your son, or at least think of your daughter, you can't run away from your love, and you'll want a child. Only when all this happens, when you live up to this stage, you'll remember my words. And then you'll be afraid to give birth, because you'll see your girl's fate in a dream. And already dreamed. The words of the gypsy Camille seemed like nonsense. But what love? What daughter? What is she even talking about? Apart from Stephen, there is no other man in Camille's life. She loves only him, and whatever he is, she will spend the rest of her life with him. And for him, this child is not wanted. Though the thoughts in Camille's head were confused, she was hardly aware of what was happening to her and around her. Meanwhile, the stranger kept predicting courage and nothing she would ever accomplish in life. A moose came, huh? Woman, here you are, son. He'll be world famous. The music that will have been playing in his head since birth will penetrate the hearts and souls of 1,000 people. And there will be nothing else in his life. He'll have no personal happiness. But that's the price of success. Your son has a hard road ahead of him, but if he chooses to come into this world, he's willing to go through it with dignity, without denying him this opportunity. I pray to God. Tears ran down Camille's cheeks. She listened attentively to the stranger, but did not know what to say. The same woman seemed to read her thoughts. When she heard the gypsy woman's words, Camille had the impression that the woman had gotten into her head and told her word for word what was on her mind at that moment. Forget about your mother-in-law's husband? The gypsy woman punished her sternly. Put it out of your mind. Go away. Let's abstract it. Do you have a roof over your head? Everything else will come with it. They'll get what's coming to them for their sins. Don't even worry about that. Their lives will be miserable. Emily is already deeply unhappy. Your husband's still got a long way to go. The stranger continued to say something else, but Camille could not remember any more words. When she opened her eyes, the gypsy woman was no longer there. She was lying on a bench next to some man who appeared to have lifted her from the cold ground. At a certain point, Camille even thought that she had dreamed the whole thing. But she remembered the gypsy woman's words so clearly that she could not have dreamed it. Naturally, an operation was
Out of the question. She was in such a state that she would not even be able to walk home. The stranger, who did not leave Camille's side for a second, waited patiently for her to speak to him.
He realized that she was at a complete loss and needed time to come to her senses. So you say you found me unconscious on the ground, Camille clarified. How did that happen? I wonder how long I fell unconscious in the middle of the park. That's what I don't know, the man answered. But I don't think it was long. It's strange that no one approached you. But that's the way it is now. People are mostly indifferent. But don't worry, I won't leave you. I'll help you as much as I can. My name is Camille, by the way. Christopher, the young woman introduced herself and extended her hand to the man. I apologize for what happened. I didn't mean to. You probably don't have time for me, do you? No way. Christopher was surprised. I'm always happy to help a good man. Did something happen to you? By the way, how are you feeling? Should I take you to the hospital? No. Camille smiled. I don't want to go to the hospital. If you don't mind, let's go to a cafe. And if you have time, of course. Camille had a sudden need to talk to someone. Christopher was the perfect person to talk to. They were almost strangers, and it was unlikely they would ever meet again, so with him, she could share everything that was on her mind. Camille was sure that he would never tell anyone, for the simple reason that they had absolutely no common ground. How awful, said Christopher after hearing Camille out. How much have you been through? Is there anything I can do for you? I want so much to support you and help you in some way. I just don't know how. Yeah. What can you do to help me? Camille smiled begrudgingly. There's nothing anyone can do for me anymore. Everything that's happened to me, I just have to get over it. Well, thank you for everything. I really appreciate it. Thank you for picking me up in the park, listening to me, supporting me. There are very few people who care. Camille started to leave the cafe, but Christopher stopped her. "Wait, are you leaving already?" he asked. "Maybe you could leave me your phone number? I promise I won't impose on you and call you for nothing. But I do care about you. What if you need my help someday?" "I don't think that's necessary," Camille said. "Understand me, please, right." Christopher did not insist. He was sure that if fate will please, it will bring them together again. And the man was not mistaken. Sometime later, he met Camille again, quite by chance. It was a few months after their first meeting in the park. By then, a lot had changed in the woman's life. Meeting Christopher had come as a complete surprise to her. When the man called out to her, Camille didn't even realize it was referring to her at first. Not much of a Camille at the mall. But when she turned around and saw Christopher, she hurried towards him. The man had just stepped off the escalator, and Camille was standing near the entrance to the store. "Is it really you?" "That's it, a meeting!" she exclaimed in surprise. "Gargaz, I never expected to see you again." By that time, Camille already had a large enough belly, which did not go unnoticed by Christopher. The man immediately asked how the baby was doing. "Thank you, everything is fine." Camille smiled and offered the man a coffee. "Since we met so suddenly, why don't we talk again?" "I don't mind," Christopher replied. "On the contrary, I'm all for it." Just like that time, Camille told him everything to his face. She herself was amazed at how frank she was with him. Camille caught herself thinking that she had never felt so at ease with anyone before. In the few months that had passed since they had parted after their heart-to-heart talk. Back then, in the cafe, so many things had happened in Camille's life. She separated from Stephen, moved into her mother's apartment, and almost broke with this past. The husband couldn't accept his wife's decision. "I thought I made it clear to you that now is not the time," he said. When Camille informed him that she had decided to keep the baby, she spoke to her husband on the same day that she had fatefully missed the surgery. Camille was as firm in her decision as ever, but Stephen was adamantly opposed to it. He was convinced that they had discussed and agreed on everything, but as it turned out, he was wrong. Stephen had not expected Camille to change her mind so abruptly and definitively. He tried to persuade her and convince her that what she was doing was wrong. But Camille was adamant. "If you don't want to live with me and the baby, then we'll live alone," the woman said. It sounded so mundane and indifferent that nothing much seemed to happen. The very next day, Camille packed her things and moved into her late mother's apartment. Ahead of her, she had to endure the funeral, which was held very modestly. And once again, Stephen showed his wife his true colors. He did not even come to say goodbye to his mother-in-law. Emily chose not to attend the ceremony either. What did we forget there? If you divorced her, reasoned the woman, she wants to solve her own problems, let her do it. No one's stopping her. We'll even be easier without her. Never mind, son. Let her deal with the tapes from the crib, and your career is still the most important thing to you. Stephen remembered that. He was used to rejection and took it as motivation to keep going. Unfinished Fellini did not want to realize that he is a complete mediocrity and no future in the film industry. He had and could not be, unlike his late. Camille no longer made any predictions about the future career of her ex-husband. She didn't care about that at all. The young woman had to organize her life. She not only had to move and settle her divorce, but she also had to find a relatively quiet job. She could not spend all day long on her feet. The best option for Camille would be to work from home, but it was not easy to find such a job. She needed experience, which she didn't have. But Camille tried anyway, and strangely enough, was able to find a suitable position quite quickly. She had no script writing or directing skills. Danaya had hinted at such positions. She was quite content with what she was offered. She had to start somewhere, and writing short scripts for simple projects for quite reasonably adequate pay That was exactly what she needed at that moment. Camille did not count on anyone's help. She realized that she would have to work until she gave birth, and then combine caring for the baby with earning money. But as hard as it was better than getting rid of the baby. Camille realized this later, after her mother's funeral and the final breakup with her husband. She realized that this child was the only thing she had in her life, and if she had killed him in cold blood, she would never forgive herself. Listening to Camille, Christopher admired her. Not every woman would be capable of such a bold and desperate move. When they were saying goodbye, the man again asked her for her phone number. And this time, Camille did not refuse. For some reason, she didn't want to part with him, like last time forever. What if they never met again by chance? "Thank you," Christopher said. "I promise that I won't call about any nonsense, only business. And if you don't mind, I'd really like to help you with the baby." "No, it's not that I'm asking for it. I don't know how to explain, but I really hope you'll understand me correctly." He could not find the right words to share with Camille what was going through his mind at that moment. But she understood without a word. She liked Christopher, but nothing but friendship and companionship could bind them together. Too little time had passed since Camille had separated from her husband. The divorce had been finalized only a few weeks ago, and a new love affair was clearly not in her plans. What kind of romance could she talk about when Camille was carrying a baby under her heart? Fortunately, the woman was feeling fine, but that didn't mean she should trade her husband for a new hunk. That would be too much. And Christopher didn't insist on anything. He was happy with the friendship.
He just really wanted to help and support this young but so strong-willed woman. Christopher was ready to wait as long as necessary. Even then, he realized that he was beginning to fall in love with Camille.
But it was premature to give vent to his feelings. Only after the baby was born, Camille gradually began to accept Christopher's advances. The man met her from the hospital, helped her in everything, and supported her. Stephen did not even know that he had a son. He was absolutely not interested in it. Since the breakup, he never called his ex-wife even to ask her how she was doing and how she was feeling. However, Camille did not care too much. Throughout her pregnancy, she was focused solely on herself and her state of health. It was very important for the young woman to stay on track. As she had planned to do, she continued to work right up to the birth and even managed to put some money aside. There is no telling what the baby might need. Fortunately, the baby was born perfectly healthy and did not need any additional care. Camille also felt fine, so they were quickly discharged from the hospital, and the woman was able to return to work. It was hard, but she managed. It was hard. There was nothing else for her to do. Christopher visited Camille regularly. The man brought the baby gifts, toys, groceries. "And don't you dare say no," he said. "It's hard for you to go shopping on your own, and there's no one to leave John with." "Is that true?" sighed the woman, who was very uncomfortable accepting his help. Of course, over time, she changed her attitude to everything that was going on. When the baby was 3 years old, they had quite a complete and happy family. When the man made Camille a marriage proposal, she was at first confused. But how could it be? She asked in surprise, "We haven't even lived together yet. You don't know me at all, do you?" "No, of course not. We've been talking for a long time. But this is different." "I love you," Christopher confessed. "I've loved you since day one." "How did we meet?" "Yes, I fell in love with you like a boy at first sight. I tried to hide it carefully. After that first meeting, I was sure that we would never see each other again, and I would forget you, erase you from my head and my heart. But when I saw you the second time, I realized it was fate. You are my destiny, and I don't need any other woman. I promise you I'll not only be a good dinner for you, but a father to John. The baby doesn't need to know who his real daddy is. Why does he need that scumbag?" And really, Camille,
who was in complete agreement with her husband, was thinking to herself. And John had been seeing Christopher as a father since he was a little boy. Time passed, and Stephen never appeared in the life of the family, and Camille decided to deprive him of parental rights. Despite the fact that at the time of John's birth they had already been divorced for several months. The man was listed as the boy's father. Now that Camilla was married to another man who genuinely loved her and her son, she wanted Christopher to be officially listed as the boy's father. The woman expected anything but mute indifference. When she called Stephen to discuss this important matter, the man informed her that he would write a letter of rejection. How could Camille not decide to have this conversation for a long time, and everything turned out to be so simple? On the other hand, what was so difficult? He never saw his son. He never paid child support. Why would he want to be the official father? Stephen gave up the boy with no regrets and didn't think about him for years. That is, until John loudly announced himself to the whole country. At that moment, when the boy was only 10 years old, he had already reached for the piano. Camille remembered the gypsy woman
she had seen in the park. It seemed to the woman that she had long forgotten this episode, blotted it out of her memory. But no, her words sounded as clearly as the music John was playing on the piano. It was as if Camille was back in that park where she had fainted, and the gypsy woman had urged her to keep the pregnancy alive. See, that came in handy. Good thing they didn't throw it away, Christopher exclaimed joyfully when he heard his son playing. The old piano had been in the man's apartment since his mother passed away. The late Wendy was very fond of music. She herself could have had a brilliant career, but the woman had to deal with raising a son who had no one but her.
Wendy was never able to realize her dream. The son was more interested in economics and business than in music. Christopher could listen to good works and songs, but not more than that. He did not plan to connect his life with music.
The woman never expected her son to realize her dream. It was too naive. But Christopher kept the piano. It was a memory of his late mother, which had a special.
And now it came in handy. It was incredible. He's doing so well, Christopher reasoned. What kind of talented son do we have? We should definitely put him in music school. Such talent can't be buried in the ground. Camille didn't hear her husband's words. At that moment, her mind was in a state of confusion. It seemed to her that she could not realize her actions or her words. Therefore, immersed in the sounds of that magical music that developed throughout the apartment, Camille kept silent and replayed in her head the words of the gypsy woman. Her reflections were interrupted by the voice of her husband, who noticed that the woman was a little lethargic. "What's wrong with you?" asked Christopher, and, receiving no answer, repeatedly shushed Camille by the shoulder. "Camille, what are you thinking about?" "Eh?" "Yes," she muttered confusedly. "Yes, you're right. We should put our John in music school. We'll do it next week." John made great progress from the first day. Camille and Christopher were getting praise from teachers they didn't know what to do with. The parents were alarmed that the boy, carried away by music, almost completely abandoned regular education. "But here we are called back to school," Camille said. "What are we supposed to do about it?" John's completely out of control. He's stopped studying altogether. Will he be expelled at this rate? Or will there be serious problems in future exams? "Christopher, why don't you say something? We have to do something about this." Or are you suggesting we just let it go and leave it at that? Christopher didn't know what to say to his wife. Unlike her, he had already accepted the fact that John's results in regular school would leave much to be desired. His vocation is music, the man reassured his wife. Don't you realize it yourself? Why does he need all this math, literature? What else is there? They won't be of any use to him in life. It's obvious. Let him do what he wants to do. Or do you mind? I don't mind, Camille exclaimed. On the contrary, I'm all for it. I really want our John to develop his talent to the full. But the other children are also involved in sports, music, dancing, and they do well at school. And our John? And our John is not like the others? Christopher grinned. And stop taking everything so personally. Let him get sauce. There's nothing wrong with that. I studied very badly in school myself, and my grades slipped even earlier than John's. It's no big deal. You see, he grew up to be a normal person, and so will he. Camille realized that her son's passion was going too far. His passion and interest in music was no longer like an ordinary hobby. The woman remembered the gypsy woman's words that just kept popping up in her mind. Your son is unusual. He has a special mission on this earth. The music he creates will touch the hearts of 1,000,000 people. But what about school? Camille didn't reassure them. Music is music. But John has to get his diploma. He can't be left with nothing. So he will get his diploma, replied Christopher. It's just that he won't be what you'd like him to be. He'll study for C's and get a certificate like everyone else. And he will connect his life with music. He won't need a gold medal. In time, Camille calmed down. She had a much easier attitude to the words of teachers, who were always saying that John would not come out of anything good. All life on the keyboard is not a problem, and songs will not be lost, they said. How do you not understand that? His talent is very mediocre, and hobbies sooner or later have to take a backseat to the real thing, namely studying. Your boy will have to get a normal specialty in the future to make a living. How will he live? Sitting on your neck? When Christopher realized that Camille is not able to put in place the brazen teachers who are no longer aware of what they say, the man did it himself. Oh, without warning his wife. He showed up at the school and had a rather tough talk with the principal, and with the vice principal, and with John's class teacher. And you know, the man said in parting, my son has someone to protect. The boy has a father. I won't let anyone hurt my John. Remember that. Camille was very grateful to her husband. She didn't know what to do anymore. It was unbearable to listen to teachers insulting her favorite son on a regular basis. But the woman could not put them in their place. She was too well brought up and did not like to get involved in conflicts. After the conversation with Christopher, the teachers did not offend the boy anymore. It was as if a lock had been put on their ugly mouths, the key to which was hidden safely and far away. No one dared to speak ill of the boy. He was still below average in his studies, and Camille was worried about that. But a few months after her husband went to school, the woman's attention turned to another, more important matter. Upon learning of the pregnancy, she once again remembered the gypsy woman's spoken words. This was the second prediction that had come true, and the woman had absolutely no doubt that she was carrying a girl under her heart. Christopher was happy. They had been planning to have a baby together for a long time, but things were not working out. It did not upset them too much, but the couple were not going to change their plans. A few years ago, when they just got married, they decided that as soon as John grows up, their family will have to have another baby. Over time, this has moved to the background, but Camille and Christopher have repeatedly thought about returning to this issue. And now, fate has decided everything for them. If we have a daughter, we'll name her Evelyn, Camille said, in honor of my mom. I'd really like her to be called that. Why not Wendy? Christopher asked. It's also a very beautiful name after my mom. They were faced with a dilemma that could easily become a big reason to argue and fight, but Camille was able to smooth things over she agreed to make concessions to her husband. And after all, the woman didn't know who they were going to have. Maybe the gypsy was wrong, and there would be another son. But a few months later, her prediction was finally confirmed. The doctor informed Camille that she was expecting a girl. The woman never ceased to be amazed at everything that was happening in her life. The son, whom she once wanted to get rid of, is growing up to be a brilliant musician. She is expecting a daughter, whose fate, according to the gypsy woman, was to depend directly on whether John would come into the world or not. Events in Camilla's life were happening so fast that she could not keep up with them. How could she have thought that she would separate from Stuyven, marry another man, and become the mother of 2 children? When she was young, she had made very different plans. She wanted to be a director. She was sure her husband would be a cinematic genius. But it turned out like this. And her mother is long gone, and Camille, immersed in the turmoil of new events and endless affairs, then even to the end, could not realize and feel her death. Everything was like a fog. The funeral, and the discord with Stephen, and the move, and the decision to keep the pregnancy. She had never seriously considered it before. Life went on as it was. Events replaced one and another. And it seemed to the woman that everything was as it should be. But now, for some reason, she suddenly felt very guilty before Evelyn for having said goodbye to her in a mundane and ordinary way. On the day of the funeral, Camille felt as if nothing had happened. Could it have been otherwise? She had so much to go through. Her mother's death had been so sudden, so shocking, that Camille had not had time and energy to fully realize the loss. Now she missed her mother very much and wished she were there, that Evelyn would never see her grandson or her future granddaughter. How unfair and cruel it was. Camille thought to herself and decided that she would visit her mother as soon as possible. But why do you have to go to the cemetery now? Christopher asked excitedly when his wife informed him that she wanted to visit her mother. You're pregnant, you never know. And in general, I would not want you to go anywhere alone. Oh, why are you so worried? The woman grinned. Pregnancy is not a disease, and the term is still quite small. Then again, there will be no time. The baby will be born. You'll have to be with her all the time. And I haven't been to my mom's for a long time. I really want to visit her. I'll come with you, Christopher insisted. I don't want to let you go alone. No, Christopher. I want to go see my mom. By yourself, Camille said firmly. This may seem strange to you, but I want to talk to her alone. Don't think she's crazy or something. I know my mom's not alive and she can't talk to me. But that's just the way it is, you know? All right. The man's reconciled. Your persistence is the envy of the world. If you've got something in your head, you'll do it. And there's no changing your mind. That was partly true. Camille was a very stubborn person by nature. She always got what she wanted. But she did it, as they say, quietly, without confronting anyone directly. She was drawn to her mother's grave for a reason. For some reason, the woman was sure that as soon as she came to the cemetery, something extraordinary and unusual would happen. Some inner feeling did not give her rest, stirring her heart and soul. And she was not mistaken. Camille's intuition did not fail her. As soon as she sat down on the bench next to her mother's grave, it was as if she found herself in another reality. Her eyes darkened for a second, and she thought she was about to faint. But a moment later, Camille saw the image of the same gypsy woman she had seen in the park many years before. And she felt light and calm. She had almost mistaken her for her dead mother. But this time, Camille realized that the woman had nothing in common with Evelyn. Were you waiting for me? The woman asked, caressing Camille's forehead with her palm. You don't have to answer that. I know you were. I can see it in your eyes. You didn't come here for nothing. You wanted to see me. You wanted to hear the answers to the questions you had in your head. I'm going to give them to you. You did the right thing, the way I told you to. Elk, you kept the baby alive, you met your love, and you're expecting a baby girl. As you can see, everything has come true. I haven't lied to you about anything. No, not everything, Camille interrupted the gypsy. You also said that Stephen and Emily would get theirs. But they're all right. I'd like to know what you meant. You also predicted a cruel fate for my daughter if I got rid of the baby. I'd like to know what would have happened to her if I had terminated the pregnancy. How curious you are. The gypsy woman grinned. As for your ex-husband and his mother, wait, as they say, it's not evening. And everything in its own time. And the fate of your daughter? Why do you need to know? How would she have turned out if John hadn't been born? That's an interesting answer Camille gave me. Or would you say I have no right to know? Curiosity is not a vice, laughed the stranger. It's just a character trait. All right, you'll have a dream. As soon as you close your eyes, you'll know what it's about. A moment later, Camille came to her senses and, opening her eyes, found herself sitting on the same bench, leaning against her mother's monument. The woman was slightly dizzy, but she remembered the conversation she had just had. Camille looked around, hoping to see the gypsy woman who had appeared to her more than once. She couldn't really be just an introduction, she reasoned to herself. I had just seen her beside me. She was sitting next to me, and we were talking. The woman had the impression that she was going mad. Camille couldn't think of anything but the gypsy woman's words. She even forgot why she had come to the cemetery. And only after a while she restrained herself and spoke to her mother. Forgive me, my dear, Camille repented. I'm sorry for everything. But as you can see, you were wrong, my son. He was born gifted and not lazy at all. He makes us happy day by day. And he's nothing like his father. Now I'm waiting for my daughter to be your pupil. What a pity you didn't live to see these happy days. How much I miss you. Mommy put her hand on the picture of Evelyn, who smiled at her. From the monument, Camille felt warm. She had purposely chosen a picture like this, one in which Mommy was young and beautiful and happy. Like this. She was remembered by friends and acquaintances, by people close to her, and Camille herself. That day, she slept like a dead woman. When she got home, the woman felt suddenly tired. You'd been outdoors all day. Spent a few hours in the cemetery after all. Normally, Camille never took such a long walk, but for some reason she didn't want to leave her mother. She had to tell her everything she wanted to tell her, the things she had to tell her. Camille just couldn't leave. Contrary to the gypsy's predictions, she had no dreams that day. She didn't dream anything that night. She thought that this time the gypsy had deceived her, but Camille did not yet know what lay ahead. The woman remembered the gypsy's words again. A few years later, by that time, John was already quite an adult. He had managed to win many awards in the musical sphere and had become a famous and sought-after musician. But as it often happens with young people, John fell in love with a talented girl without memory. She was so gifted that in a moment she became his muse. Of course, Camille was upset that her son wants to give up the merits of classical music, giving preference to pop. Do you really want to write songs for her? Asked Camille, when her son told her that they planned to live separately and had already found a suitable apartment where they could set up a studio for rehearsals. What about the classics? You're a genius composer. Such talent is only given to a few. Do you really want to give up everything to write this horrible pop music? And if you love it, won't you regret giving up lucrative contracts abroad? I won't, Mom, I won't, John assured her. I love Jenna, and I can only see my future with her. She is an incredibly talented girl, and I want to write only for her. We have the perfect creative union and the classics. Nothing will stop me from returning to that medium if I ever want to. I don't think I'll ever have that desire, though. John's biological father had made repeated attempts to reach into his son's wallet and make a fortune, but he had no reason to. Christopher stood proudly for Stephen's family
and was never able to achieve anything significant in life. His scripts never became in demand for lack of work and recognition. The man began to drink, and by the time his son grew up, accumulated a number of ailments that required careful treatment. As a consequence,
Impressive financial investments. Emily's health was also beginning to cough up gradually. After all, she was no longer young. And worries about the fate of her son, who had failed to make it in life and was drinking, left an indelible mark on her mental and physical state. When things got really bad and Stephen was diagnosed with a serious, incurable disease, he remembered the son he had insisted on killing years before. For Camille, such impudence was quite expected. But for John, who had never been told by his loving parents who his birth father was, and that he had been deprived of parental rights. The visit of Stephen and his mother came as a very real and very unpleasant surprise. By then, he and Jenna had almost moved into their new apartment and were packing up the rest of their belongings that afternoon. When he heard fiddling in the hallway, his mother's voice immediately came out of her room. At first, the young man didn't realize what was going on. He stood staring at the uninvited guests and could not utter a word. "John, how have you grown?" Emily exclaimed, recognizing her grandson at once. "But who else could it be? Oh, Camille, have you never told John about us?" "How could I?" "Mom, who are these people?" The young man asked in surprise. "What are they doing here?" John could see from his mother's face that she was very uncomfortable with their visit. Camille did not understand how they knew the address of Christopher's apartment. She couldn't understand how they had the conscience to show up on their doorstep and ask for something. But Emily and Stephen were not going to back down. They insisted that Camille let them in. And when the woman refused, they made a scene. "Is that how it is?" Emily was outraged. "They won't let her father and grandmother on her doorstep." "You've got a nerve. We didn't come to see you, but John, and we need to talk to him." The young man was completely bewildered. "What father? What grandmother?" he asked. "Mom, explain to me what's going on. Who are these people? What do they want from us?" Emily continued to scandalize. Stephen also joined the conversation, and, insulting Camille, he accused her of not letting him communicate with his son, of driving the woman out of her mind. "Let's get out of here," she exclaimed. "How could you have the nerve to come in here? Did you even want to get rid of my child? And you, Stephen, if you haven't drunk all your brains yet, abandoned me when I decided to give birth? Or have you forgotten about that?" "I forgot." The scandal continued for about half an hour, until Emily, Stephen, and Camille had had enough of yelling at each other and exchanging accusations of all the deadly sins. The ex-husband and mother-in-law walked away with nothing, but they weren't about to back down. "What do you propose to do now, Mom?" asked the man when they got outside. "We need money, and as you realize, we won't get it. Look at the son I've raised. Didn't say a word. He's a one-celled amoeba. He's a half-assed musician." "You should shut up." A furious mother gave her son a place to live. He had not dried milk on his lips yet, but he had already become famous not only for the whole country, but also on the world stage. He made a name for himself. And who are you? "I thought you'd have achieved something in life, but you're not, and I don't have you. So we'll just sit here, outside their entrance, and keep watch. Sooner or later, the taller one will come out, and we'll talk to him without that kikimora." Stephen was shocked. His mother had never allowed herself to say such a thing to him. The man was very much offended and hurt by her words. He was sure that she believed in him. But it turned out that his mother had long ago written him down as a loser. He didn't expect that from her. What else could she do? Stephen did not live up to her expectations. If a few years ago Emily sincerely believed that her son would find his place in the sun, she convinced herself that some people succeed in adulthood, but her son was not one of them. He was completely talentless, and at his age, it was too late to change anything. Camille had to tell her son about everything she had been through, about breaking up with Stephen, about their ridiculous marriage, and even about wanting to get rid of him. John didn't know how to react to all this. He was shocked by his mother's revelations. In the mind of a young man who had never faced serious trials in his life, could not understand how one could get rid of his child. "I'll go for a walk," John said. When the conversation comes to an end, I need to ventilate." "Will you come back?" Camille asked excitedly. "Son, understand, Mom? I've got it all figured out." John snapped at her. "I need to go for a walk and be alone. I'll come back for my things, of course. You know Jenna and I are moving into a new apartment." Yes, son. I remember everything," Camille replied. "I'll be waiting for you at home. For now, your home is still here." But John did not manage to realize his plans. Emily and Stephen were waiting for him at the entrance, and they immediately responded to him. He barely had time to get out of the house. "Are you still here?" Well, the young man was surprised. "What do you want from me?" "To talk, John. To talk for," wailed Emily. "And just listen to us, please. We have no one else to turn to but you." John was not the kind of man to gloat at the misfortune of others, so he listened to his suddenly appearing relatives, who begged him for help, made excuses, regretted the past. To tell the truth, he wasn't too interested in any of this. The young man agreed to talk to them purely out of politeness, because he couldn't and rudely decided not to up to his father and the same grandmother. That was not the way he had been brought up, but John refused to help them. Of course, he tried to do it as gently as possible, but Emily and Stephen literally provoked the young man into a scandal, and he politely but firmly told them that he did not need such relatives. "My mom told me everything," told John's relatives. When their tirade came to an end, "I know you didn't want me to be born at all, and you insisted on it to the end. Unlike her, I was raised by another man. He and my mom were always there for me, and I consider him my father. It's not our fault that your life turned out the way it did. It's only your own fault." Emily tried to object to her grandson, but he interrupted her, saying that he had to go. "Good day to you," John said. "I will not hide that I was not too happy to meet you. But, as they say, nothing happens for nothing." Emily and Stephen had no choice but to leave. All they did on the way home was argue. As time went on, conflicts in their family became more and more frequent. Stephen felt worse and worse. The disease was progressing. Emily also often assured, which made her very angry. For several months, they literally gnawed at each other. The woman did nothing but blame her son for not living up to her expectations. She had expected to rest on her laurels in her old age at her son's expense. Stephen reproached his mother for having convinced him that he and Camille did not need a son. Could they have imagined that John will grow up to be such a talented man and will be able to win not only fame and popularity, but also earn fabulous money? But they did not get a penny of John's royalties, and this annoyed them very much. But Emily and Stephen could do nothing about it. They could only accept their sad fate and live out their last days in complete poverty. Emily outlived her sick son by only a few years. Camille felt that she should still attend her ex-husband's funeral, and Christopher supported her in this.
"Whoever he was once, you loved him," the man reasoned. "It seems to me that you've made the right decision." "I was blind," Camille replied. "But still, living with Stephen had given me an irreplaceable life experience. And a son. Such a talented, brilliant son." John didn't come to the funeral, when his mother informed him that his birth father had passed away. The young man was on tour with his wife. If he had been free and was in the city, he would probably have attended
The funeral at least to support his mother. But to cancel his plans, to disrupt such important events for the sake of a complete stranger, John did not. Camille didn't insist on it either. She herself would not have come to say goodbye to her ex-husband if it were not for a sense of duty. The night after the day of his funeral, Camille had the same dream that the gypsy woman spoke about, seeing her little girl, who in her dream was already absolutely adult. These eerie images, the woman immediately realized this was the very In the middle of the night, she woke up covered in sweat. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't herself. "Oh, what's the matter with you?" asked Christopher when his wife jumped up on the bed. "Why are you crying? Did you have a terrible dream?" "Yes," replied Camille, confused. "A very bad dream. I'm sorry I woke you up. I think I'll go to the kitchen and get some water." The woman went to the kitchen on wobbly legs and poured herself a glass of water and decided to take a shower. Out of the blue, Camille felt the need to wash herself of the dirt she had seen in her dream. "My God," she repeated to herself. "God forbid it should happen to anyone. How good it is that I have kept my son alive." When Camille saw this horrible dream, she realized what a nightmare she had saved her little girl from. The woman was trembling. Goosebumps were running all over her body. When she went back to bed, she fell asleep, and in her dream, the gypsy woman came to her again. Now Camille realized that it was only a dream, and when she woke up, the stranger would not be there again. "Well," said the woman enigmatically, "as you can see, everything has come true. I have not deceived you in anything. But your husband, who betrayed you, who refused your common child, did not conceal anything. He lived himself out of the light. Your mother-in-law will soon go to her grave too. It won't be long now. Your son has become a brilliant musician, and your little girl has escaped a terrible fate." Camille wanted to object. And in her dream, she saw her daughter as an adult. She was still growing up to that age. But she didn't dare. The woman was afraid to imagine that something like this could happen to her little girl. It was a nightmare you wouldn't wish on an enemy. And she's so good and kind, and I don't think God would send her such a terrible punishment. She certainly didn't deserve it. Camille hoped that this time, too, the gypsy had told her the truth. She had never deceived her about anything. And to be afraid? How could she not worry about her own daughter? She is her own daughter and her most beloved daughter. In the morning, Camille woke up absolutely calm. It seemed to her that something invisible, not tangible, hugged her tightly, surrounding her with its reliable protection. Of course, there was no gypsy woman near her. She never came to her in her dreams again. And when Camille visited her mother's grave, the stranger never came to her again. From time to time, Camille remembered her. She remembered the gypsy once again when her mother-in-law passed away. And then, many years later, when her daughter had passed the age threshold, at which she had appeared to her in her dreams. At that moment, Camille realized she could finally calm down. Once again, the gypsy kept her word. Nothing bad could ever happen to her girl again. The woman had never felt so light and calm in her life. Camille looked at her life from the outside, periodically dipping into memories of the past, and realized that if it had not been for the gypsy woman who had appeared out of nowhere and also mysteriously disappeared, it was possible that everything would have turned out completely differently. These strange visions allowed the woman to avoid many mistakes and save not only her fate, but also her beloved daughter. It is possible that these were just delusional dreams. Or maybe this woman came to her. In fact, Camille did not know and never managed to solve this mystery. But she didn't need to. She didn't want to. Life went on as it was and turned out quite well. The children had grown up. It was time to think about herself. Now that there was nothing more to worry about, the ordeal was behind her. Camille. Christopher could devote time to themselves and each other. There was more than enough now. Although in the past it often hadn't been.